Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian, and this is a very special episode. As always, send in your questions, and if you have any questions regarding what we're going to talk about today, we can actually follow up on those as well. But today's episode, we are featuring an interview with Bryan Ho and Nicole Mair, who are the authors. How does that sound? The authors of Mississauga Confidential. Hot off the press. This book will be launched next week at the Heritage Mississauga AGM, and stay tuned for more details on that. But for Ask a Historian, we are going to explore the creation, the concepts, the ideas, the stories that went into the making of Mississauga Confidential. Something we are most excited about, and something that Nicole and Bryan, but Nicole, I know you can say, has been in the works for a long time. We were much younger when, but here we are on the eve of this very exciting moment of a culmination of a project of a labor of love, of pain, of time, here we are, really excited to launch this book. So again, for those of you turning in, welcome to Ask a Historian, and we are here again with Bryan and Nicole for to talk about Mississauga Confidential. So thank you for joining us here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to see you holding the book. I mean, it's just a really exciting time. Yeah.
I mean, you made it. Well, we're there. And there were probably times in this process where we wondered if we would get there, or you would wonder if we would get there. Maybe that's a painful memory to drag up. But can you just, how did it come to be? This was a project that had, began in a different iteration. Nicole, Bryan, you guys took an existing storyline and had this concept behind it. Can you talk a little bit just about the process of creation of how this thing has come to be what it is?
You were there first, so.
Well, it did start with your Darker Side newsletter series, and I wrote my first article for that series in 2011.
Wow.
I know. And that continued for a few years until 2016 when I was volunteering, and you suggested we should put these stories into a publication like the Lost Villages book. But I guess we had other ideas, and you thankfully just let us do whatever of just revisiting all the different stories, trying to dig even deeper than we did the first time, find more interesting connections, and sort of tie it together with the theme of like old film noir movies, mystery novels, the different pieces of the whole mystery genre.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I came in later, and it was like about putting a kind of a unifying theme of that 1940s, 1950s pulp fiction theme around it. And it's involved even beyond that, from where it started to kind of encompass crime writing and detective stories from the beginning of the genre in the 19th century to crime writing into today. So the style evolves with the stories, where we begin in the 19th century with our first murder in the book, and then moving through into the late 20th century with the final cases of the book. So there's still that unifying theme, but we wanted to, like, the more we wrote, the more it kind of, we began to see it as like a biography of the city of Mississauga, where we start with farm fields and the crimes that are being committed in the area at the time. Toronto Township at the time involve farmers and murders of these landowners by very often like farm hands or servants, this sort of underclass. And it moves into the early 20th century to involve gangsters and gangsterism and roadhouses, gambling, bootlegging, drugs. this sort of thing as we move into the late 20th century. So it really is a biography of the city, and it didn't really start like that, but it's become that, and it really is a unifying piece in aesthetics, in the way that it reads, but also thematically in the way that the stories flow into one another, which again surprised us because it did start out as these articles that didn't have necessarily a connection, but we were able to form it into something that I think is pretty cohesive.
I think, like, just to explore the breadth of it, our first case I think is 1847, and the last case 1986. I mean, you talk, it's in a way it's the conscience of a city. It's history, the darker side, the other side, and stuff that was probably, well, in many cases, the front page news of the era of the day in which it happened, and therefore the lives of people that lived here, but not necessarily the stories that have been passed down as our everyday histories that we've come to understand. Like, the people that were involved in crime generally don't have streets and parks named after them. So
Yes.
it's kind of the forgotten story in a sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
hidden in plain sight maybe. But I think that's the neat part for me, having read this, is that way in which you stitch the stories together in kind of a tapestry over time. I think it's really, it's good. This is a very unacademic word. It's a very cool thing.
Well, we take that as a compliment for sure.
Yeah, no, it's I think this will surprise people in hopefully a very good way. Not only the way it's written, but the stories that are explored therein. I mean, it happened here, right? Like, this is
Oh,
that's the
absolutely.
stories of it. What were some of the challenges, and maybe the in the process of research and gathering the stories? Like, we had those initial articles, which pale in comparison to the final product here, because you delved into a great deal more research. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the highlights of the research process, the challenges of the research process?
Well, I would say, especially later on in the process, just even the past few years, obviously COVID, the pandemic, we wanted to access certain files and certain records, certain archives, and we could only do that remotely, where we were submitting requests for certain files, whether it was to the Ontario Archives, the Library of Canada, that sort of thing, where we might have actually gone and accessed these sort of in person. We had put in requests, and they were working remotely for a long time, and so we had to wait for a lot of resources. So that was a big issue with, just in terms of logistics with the research itself. And obviously, you deal with sort of the issue with older resources. When we went to like the Toronto Library, and we wanted to access a newspaper, and just sort of having to go through that, and eventually they didn't have that copy that we needed, simply because it had deteriorated. The microfilm that they had was being restored. Yeah. So, just like the problems with dealing with very old things, is definitely a thing that comes to my mind.
Is there anything in the process? I know there were things in the book that surprised me, and that were unknown, but how about things that surprised you, things that caught you off guard and perhaps took you in a different direction than you had initially started out? Just individual stories, individual cases, individual people that percolate through. Can you share some of those with us?
Well, okay. The one thing I'll say is I was surprised over and over how many times these stories became internationally involved. Like, we have stories that they start here, or someone starts here and they go into America, they go into Jamaica, they go into Australia. Like, it's a global thing that some of these stories are affecting people thousands of miles away, and people at the time wouldn't know really, because it's just such a smaller communication means. There's no internet. Right. So just generally that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of related to that, but like for me, in general, we would have the article, for example, from the Heritage News, and we'd be like, okay, well, you know, we've got something, and it's pretty much all there, and then we'd research it, and we'd be able to find all, like, there's something else, there's a connection, like just a little bit more, and like inevitably every article there was a moment where we're like, do you see this? Like, we find this thing, and it's like, I can't believe I just read this, and it's got to go in the article, and like it creates kind of like this anchor for the article. It was just so enriching, the research process, because it really is like an investigation where you're trying to piece together this puzzle of history, and create this through line so that you're able to write this narrative of a particular story. And it's funny how even just the smallest spark, like the smallest thing, creates this huge journey. Like for me, the story of Police Chief Garnet McGill, who was the police chief of Toronto Township from the end of World War II, right through into the 60s. And for us, he wasn't on our radar at all until about 80% through the writing of the book. And we were reading a book by Jocko Thomas, one of the crime reporters for the Toronto Star. And he mentions Garnet McGill just briefly in relation to the gambling houses that were sort of around the province at the time, the 1950s and the 1960s. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like, I guess I'll just take a look into this. And what happened was it became the basis for one of our biggest chapters, because I just kept finding more and more stuff on Garnet McGill, the roadhouse, the gambling houses, specifically the Center Road Veterans Club here in Cooksville, and it sort of snowballs to the point where it's bringing in figures, just like Nicole said, internationally. So this is a gambling house in Cooksville, but it's bringing in mafia figures from the United States, people like Stefano Magaddino in Buffalo, people like the Five Families in New York, people like Johnny Papalia, head of one of the most powerful crime families in Hamilton, eventually. People like the Detroit Mafia. And it's all coming together here in this one place in Mississauga at the time. And for me, it eventually, it's an article that involved 500 plus articles, tying it all together. And it started with that one sort of mention in this book. So for us, it was extremely fascinating. And inevitably, every single article involved that moment. Maybe not to that extent, but again, in a moment where it's like it opens up a new branch. It's like opening up a door, and you're able to walk through it, and in there's another hallway that you have to search through, and open up more doors. So the research process was, like, for me, like, as somebody who's not as used to it as, say, you or Nicole, because you two are historians, and I see myself more as a storyteller, but like for me, the research process was extremely gratifying, and that really surprised me a lot.
I was gonna say, I from my perspective, not being in this additional research, the incredible research that went into this book, you're kind of like a dog with a bone. You keep following it, right? Like you're digging, digging,
Yeah.
digging.
Yeah.
But I love your metaphor of the long hallway and the doorway, because I don't want to give too much away, but I would say there are two moments in this book that blew me away. Was I knew a little bit about the roadhouses, although the Plaza Lodge shocked me in terms of its seedy stories, and considering it was on our landscape for so long. But the tie-ins to Mickey McDonald, and his adventures, as you call them, but that long hallway with the door that leads to a very dark place. The Philip Rumbold story to me stands
Oh
out.
yeah.
It's kind of that opening to a very nefarious world that is still this unsolved little thing that happens here. No, I don't want to say little thing, but again, I don't want to give away. But for me, just to put those kernels there, those are stories that really hit hard, I think, and really
Oh,
opened
yeah.
my eyes a little bit to the wider story, wider tale. So, kudos on telling those. It's
Yeah, the Rumbold murder is a great example of it, where what's reported in the newspapers is like the very tip of the iceberg. And as you say, the rest of it, what's hidden with that, we're able to find by digging through the OPP police records of the investigation, really uncovers a dark, dark secret held within that story. So no, that's a great example of exactly what was happening throughout, our research into a lot of these stories for sure.
and I want to, if anyone listening to this, I think if that doesn't grab you to want to read the story of that story itself, I mean, there's a good one. If like go down this rabbit hole and see what you can find out. The are is there anything uh, is there anything that continues as a mystery to you that that you touch on in the book, but it remains unsolved, remains fascinating to you, that you wish there was more there? I just wrote an article this week on comparing the 1952 gold heist to what we just heard recently from a week ago at Pearson. But are there anything like that kind of sticks with you even to this moment of an unresolved mystery?
I mean, the Rumble one for sure, because you have the police files, you see the threads that they're kind of chasing. Some of them seem plausible, but it's like, what happened there that stopped them from pursuing that line of questioning? Because it's never solved. It's a murder that's never solved. But it seems like they're on to something, like, because we have their notes. It's just,
I would say, this is pure speculation on our part, but like I would say I personally have a clear suspect. I would say the police have a clear suspect, but you're absolutely right. I mean, like they drop the investigation and they're asked to drop the investigation by the victim's family. And there's a lot of like you can, I would say, read between the lines, but it's one of those things that, it becomes just lost to history. And there's a certain amount of that. In some cases, it's a reoccurring theme that we touch on in the book, where there's only so much you can know, and with the passing of time, you just sort of have to accept that that puzzle is going to remain a little bit incomplete, that there are pictures and pieces of the picture that aren't going to be filled in. And that's the case even when like a murder is solved, where you have a suspect. That suspect is arrested, put on trial, in some cases convicted, and in some cases executed. There are a couple of cases in the book where the evidence really sort of is circumstantial, is incomplete, it's flawed, and you do wonder, oh, should this person have been convicted? Did this person get a fair trial? Is this person someone who should have been executed? And what sort of are some of the motivations behind some of the decision making around that? So there are some cases like Stefan Swierda, Walter Zabolotny, a couple of cases from the book where it's like, well, did they get the right man? And there are also cases like the murder of Joe Kong, who was ran a laundry in Streetsville, and he was murdered in Streetsville, where the case wasn't pursued, even when they did have clear suspects and they did have witness testimony and witness evidence tying the two suspects to his murder. The case wasn't pursued. And so there are questions like that even with the sources that we have, remain incomplete. And you have to kind of, to a certain extent, accept that you're never going to get the full answer. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of necessary when writing a book like this, I think, where you have to sort of accept that, you know, the picture that we have is the picture that we have, even if it is incomplete at times.
Yeah. I can say I'm sure it's few and far between, but the nefarious characters in our underworld seldom left biographies behind. So
That's true. Even Mickey McDonald, when he did write an autobiography,
Yeah,
he destroyed it. So there you go.
and the story of Mickey McDonald still, considering how documented and colorful he is, I never knew that figure connected to us in terms of Mississauga. But you know that he himself ends up as an unknown, right? Like
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I
uh,
mean, you know, like we really see him because so like he's Canada's public enemy number one, the most wanted criminal, the very first most wanted criminal by the RCMP because he escapes from prison and just disappears. And you know, you do wonder if it's like you can imagine sort of these scenarios where he is kind of like, you know, just sort of disappears and he lives, you know, a quiet life on some farm in Nebraska, but or he's, you know, murdered in a shallow grave somewhere. It's these unknowns that really kind of add to the mystery and to the mystique of a figure like Mickey McDonald. And you know, it's interesting again, like you said at the beginning, that a figure like this, who's notorious throughout Canada, and continues to be notorious to this day. I mean, he became a criminal at the Plaza Lodge and the Chicory Inn here in Mississauga and Port Cret, or in Clarkson rather. And you know, in a way, he is our one of Mississauga's least favorite sons, and he's you know, he's definitely a big part of our book. And then even to go back to the surprising part, like for what's interesting is that a lot of these figures keep appearing throughout different cases where, you know, a figure like Mickey McDonald, a lot of the gangsters in the 1930s and our stories in the 1930s, they appear in 3 or 4, 5 sometimes articles in the most unexpected ways. I mean, Mickey McDonald is one of these characters. Johnny Papalia appears in Garnet McGill and the Center Road Club, but then he appears again in the Peter Demeter case, just spontaneously just pops up, and it's like, why is this person here? And it feels like there's this sort of like really tight knit quasi incestuous kind of, you know, sort of underworld where everybody just knows everybody, you know, they like have conventions and meetings.
And some of the colorful names that come out, you got was there Bingo Beasley and B Canoe, and you know, like all these you can picture the times, and then I guess the hero in our story becomes in a sense Chief McGill, and you know, like these people that tried to chart a different course or make sure the darker side didn't take over everyday life in cases. So it's amazing what you've done, and to read the book, I encourage everyone to pick it up. But if you had to make a sales pitch, if somebody said, you know, what do I expect with this book? What would people expect if they pick up this book?
Well, I mean, I
Other than a
hope,
good read.
yeah, no, I definitely hope they find it first and foremost entertaining, and they will find it entertaining. It's as you said, it's not an academic book, and it was never meant to be an academic history. It does have copious amounts of endnotes. I will say, so definitely proud of that. But at the same time, you know, as much research as we did, and as much as it's all based on fact, we were trying to tell a great story, and we want to be true to that sort of pulp fiction, you know, inspiration of it, where it feels like you're reading through a really compelling, you know, detective magazine from the 1940s. So, just on a stylistic, on a aesthetic level, you can definitely expect that. But I think for us, it's these figures like Mickey McDonald, his wife Kitty Cat, the Campbell brothers, the Banwells, the couple who
Yeah.
robbed a bank on their wedding day. Even like just sort of like twisted characters like a Peter Demeter. We've researched these figures for so long that we feel we know them.
Mm-hmm.
And in a weird way, they feel like family. I know it sounds very bad to say that, but like
You're gonna have an interesting family
in
reunion.
it is
Yeah.
very interesting. Well, there you go. That's where it is. That's the book. But like it's just a strange family history, but like we've come to kind of like understand these characters, and yeah, in some cases really love these characters and love the stories even when they're doing very bad things. Like we love these stories so much, and we're so passionate about the stories in the journey that these stories like led us on to research and to write it. And we just hope that the readers like have that same love of this subject, after they read the book. And even for us too, like just even living in Mississauga, like it's created in us more love of the city, that we live in, because it's like, I don't know how to, but you it doesn't make you hate the city. Like you think, oh, crime, the city, bad stuff happens in the city. It doesn't. Like you drive around and then you start recognizing places. Oh, that's where the bank was robbed in Port Credit. Oh, that's where this murder happened. I know this, again, that sounds weird, but like it just connects you to the city in such a deep and profound way that you can't help but appreciate it even more. And like I hope even beyond the topic of true crime, that whoever reads it and lives in Mississauga really understands that, the importance of local history and heritage, and that it's not boring, and that it does live with us, and it does have an impact on today. It will continue to have an impact, in the future. And whether the topic is true crime or a different aspect of local history, or a different story, a different group's perspective, like all these things are there. They just need to be investigated, researched, written about, talked about. And I feel like that's what, you're doing, Heritage is doing, and we did this little part of it here with this book.
Well, part of maybe I'll stumble on my words a bit, but part of getting people caring about and connecting them in the place they live is being curious about the place they live and exploring that. And this book is an incredible example of exploring that curiosity, and connecting to the place in which you live, the geography in which you live, the people that lived here before us, in some cases while we've been here. Like I said, it's stories of the darker side of murder, crime, punishment, etc. But it's also a biography of the city in that sense as well. And I think that in that realm, what a home run. You guys have done an incredible job with this. I can't. I had an idea which you guys ran with and turned it into something incredible. And so I can't encourage anyone more than this than to pick up the book Mississauga Confidential, Murder, Scandal, and Crime from the City's Darker Side. It is being launched on Wednesday, May 31st, 6:30 p.m. at the Streets Mill Kinsman Center. This is Heritage Mississauga's annual general meeting. You have a chance to meet the authors and buy the book. The book is available for $25, and it is literally hot off the presses. It's been a labor of love over many years. and many gray hairs since then. But we are so excited to welcome this into the treasured stories and histories of the city of Mississauga. So thank you, Bryan and Nicole, for everything you've done and everything you continue to do. And seeing this book come to life, kudos to you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's very
and for everyone joining us here at Ask a Historian, again, check out the book when you have a chance. It's available through Heritage Mississauga. It'll be in our library systems. Contact us for more information. Come out to the AGM, and I'm sure at many times through the year, you'll have a chance to see Bryan and Nicole in the community giving presentations and talking about the book. It is well worth checking out. You can also check out the podcast series, Mississauga Confidential, on Podbeam that Bryan and Nicole put together in anticipation of the book coming to be. So a lot of those chapters, episodes, if you will, are on the podcast. But the book itself, what a treasure gem. And here it is in our hands, and very much looking forward to the city seeing it, sharing it, reading it, and talking about it. So again, thank you for joining us at Ask a Historian. Bryan, Nicole, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.